Hi, I'm Chuck Newsome, here representing Detroit Jazz Festival Foundation for JazzEd Detroit. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about something very important to me as a guitar teacher and as a player, which is the topic of shell voicings. Now, shell voicings are not something that are exclusive to guitar players, but generally something that piano players, guitar players, vibraphone players, or harmonic comping instruments generally tend to think about. The reason that shell voicings are particularly useful and important to me, and I think they should be to you as well, is that they are the most adaptable, quick to learn and get into practice, and then honestly, to this day, frequently usable type of chord shapes that I know. And that's definitely saying something because if you think about guitar, one of the biggest problems people have when they come to me as a professor and a teacher and a professional in the area is being overwhelmed with chord shapes, and they have a book and it's got a bunch of big giant chord shapes in it that people can't really get their heads around, and there's so many notes in there that generally difficult to connect one chord to the next. And what we're going to talk today is about the value of voice leading and connecting chord voicings from one to the other through shell voicings. So to get started with shell voicings, we're going to divide the guitar, vertically speaking, into 3 sections, and each section is going to have 2 strings in it. What this helps us do is divide the guitar up into a somewhat palatable visual map. Something like what usually presents itself more intuitively to us when we look down on a piano keyboard and see how each octave appears identical up the keyboard with the pattern of white and black keys to delineate. So in this case, we are going to pair these 2 strings down here, the low E and the low A, 6 and 5, and call those 2 the bass strings. And we're not even going to touch them if there's a bass player. And like all rules, they're meant to be broken, but for the particular application here where it's really important that we think of those as bass notes. Bass notes on the guitar are not bad, except when you have a bass player, because unless you can double exactly what they're doing or play something that links up perfectly with what they're doing, you'll get a lot of awkward moments and clashes down in the low register. So with that being said, the next 2 strings, these are the strings that we're going to focus on today. This is where our main harmonic guts are going to happen. In terms of playing our thirds and sevenths. And of course you can play thirds and sevenths on the other strings, and that's all okay if you already know a lot about guitar, but this is a system that's set up to get everybody started on the same page. And so we're going to start with that, thirds and sevenths there. Again, on the low strings we'll have a root or a fifth if we're not playing with a bass player, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Last but not least, and we might get to this at the very end, these top 2 strings are where we can add higher notes on top, which could be melody notes for a chord melody, or they could be just other chord tones, other decorative chord tones, like anything from just the root up there sounds good sometimes, to the ninth, etc. And that's basically just a thing that I found is really helpful has been helpful for my students and certainly helpful for myself over the years. And although it helps to approach things this way from the beginning, is by no means beginner material. I just played a duo gig last night with a very good friend of mine, a singer, and thinking about this was thinking about how much I use these things on my own gigs right now. Sometimes in their most basic form, but often with just maybe a note added on. So to get into the particulars, and I'm going to play these first with the bass, but I want you to try each of them with the bass and without the bass. In every example we do with the bass and without the bass. I'll show you what I mean. So the first little sort of node that we're going to work with is right down here, and it's in position 2 on the guitar, but it's which means that our first finger is on fret 2. But essentially what we're looking for is notes, because this method is designed to allow you to attain laser precision when looking for just 1, 2 important notes for a chord and connecting them to the next, versus these giant blocky shapes that you have to memorize and that often don't connect to one another until you know hundreds and hundreds of them. So first chord we're going to learn today is C major 7, and it's simply the root on the 5th string, C, the third on the fourth string, E, and then the B there on our third string. And of course I can play that with a pick, I can play that with my fingers. Right now I'm going to play that with my fingers because when I'm playing the bass I usually use my thumb for bass notes. So while we're playing the bass I'll use my fingers. So this is a C major 7, and the beauty of this system is that it's very simple. And the only other two chords we're going to learn in this section is a C7, which involves literally just lowering your B natural or your major 7th by 1/2 step, which leaves you at B flat, your dominant 7. And so then we have a C7 chord. And last but not least, Joe Pass said, I only know 3 chords, great guitar player, major, minor, and dominant. And I think this is what he meant. And here's minor. So at that point, we've got our C still from the beginning. We've retained our B flat on the third string, but now we've moved our E down to an E flat. So major, dominant, minor, easy as pie. We want to work those in 2 ways again. So while I'm on those, I'll give you the fingerings and how they look when you do not play the bass note, and when you don't play the bass note. They have a really interesting quality if you're a guitar player maybe that hasn't played jazz. You might know this. The 2 notes that are left in this chord when I take the root out actually make a power chord, which is a really cool guitar sound. Power chord is an interval of a 5th basically, but it makes that power chord off of the 3rd. It's a little bit much information for some of you folks out there perhaps, but I know there's a couple of you know who you are. That could dig what I'm saying there. So anyways, in this position, review one more time, C major 7, C7, and C minor 7. The other node, or the other basic sector of the guitar that we're going to work on, being that we're building off of a C root, is this C on the 6th string. And the reason we picked this one, by the way, is because that's just where C is located on the 5th string. So if we go up to the 6th string, the only difference here in the core shape is that we now have a string that's being skipped. In other words, this 5th string, we're not playing any notes on it, we're not fingering it, we're just sort of muting it out, and I'll show you how that works here promptly. So the first chord of our 3 chords, major 7, major 7, dominant 7, and minor 7, in this node, so to speak, the 8th position, is C on the low E string, nothing on the A, the 7th B comes first instead of the 3rd, on the 4th string, and then the E, or the 3rd, comes all the way up top on the 3rd string. So here's your C major 7. Your dominant 7 is just find the B and lower it, and then your minor 7 is find the E flat and lower it, maintain the B flat. There are your 3. So again, pretty straightforward, and usually I can teach a student within the first lesson these basic shapes. Going on from there, the next thing that I like to do is to just take and practice these in each node and kind of explore the idea of wherever you start will usually set your journey or your path for the rest of your journey. So what I mean by that is if I start with this C major 7 and I want to play a 1, 6, 2, 5, I'm going to make the dominant chord, or the 6th chord a dominant chord, A7. So I'm going to play C major 7. I'll do a pick now. A7. And why would I go to this A7? Well, out of the 2 that we know, we have either this A7 way up here or this A7 way down here. And since we're here on 2nd position, it makes sense to go to the closest one. And then the D minor 7 that we would go to, instead of going way up here, we would go. And then following that same logic, G7 sits here. So the full progression, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. And the beauty of this really reveals itself when we take the root off, because what we end up having is, and that, my friends, is voice leading on a very basic level, but to me, that's, the more I learn about harmony, that's really where the bread is buttered. That's where everything, the magic happens, so to speak, is in the way that chords move from one to another. And it took me a long time to figure out, so it's the most expensive advice I could give you, but it is the truth. So we could do that exact same thing in the upper node, and you'll notice here you have kind of two options about where the closest A7 is. You could either go up to this A7 here from the C major 7 or down to this A7. If you go down to this A7, you'll likely end up in this track here that we already dealt with in terms of where the voice leading pulls you. So we're going to go up here and watch how this works. And with a pick. And finally without the bass notes. And I'll do like 2 quarter note strums per bar. And we're going to talk about somebody important here, a name you all need to know. The guitar player that I just alluded to there before that 1625 with thirds and sevenths was the great Freddie Green, the fantastic, one-of-a-kind guitar player that was a member of the Count Basie Orchestra for many, many, many moons, and a great writer. The way he generally played, and I've checked this out quite a bit, is sometimes he only played one note. So if you imagine like something like this, which is, the idea of that is basically adding what he would call a tenor voice, or just a voice right above the bass that would be in concert with the bass. And he would play sometimes one note and sometimes 2 notes. And if you play 2 notes, then it's this exact concept that we're talking about. And most of the time he wouldn't play the bass note because the bass player is playing the bass note and it gets kind of muddy. So if you leave the bass note off, you get... and then go down. So that's a 1625, and I would get my students to play that in other keys. So maybe the next key to do it in would be B flat, because that's your rhythm changes key. Is one of the 2 positions you could do it in for rhythm changes. I mentioned earlier, and I don't think I showed any, I drew attention to it, but I mentioned that on these shell voicings that have a gap on the 5th string where you're not playing that note, like this, say this C right here, I mentioned muting that note, and the reason I didn't say anything right away after is because it's a thing that I've come to do second nature, but it is something that I had to learn, and that idea is muting that 5th string, and try not to get it right on a fret where it's gonna ring with a harmonic, but somewhere like there in the middle where it's dead, and then you can simply strum down. And I'll post a video of some gypsy jazz as well, or a clip from a video with some gypsy jazz as well. And in that style, you'll see them do a kind of a strum pattern called les pompes. And essentially that's the same thing, but with kind of a little bit of a lilt to it. Kind of an idea. So those are some basic uses. I'm going to show you guys just a couple of more, and I'm going to use the rhythm changes chord progression from I've Got Rhythm, which is basically 1625 in B flat twice, maybe 3625 one of those times, and a movement to 4 and back again. A cycle of dominance, 3, 6, 2, and 5, all dominants on the bridge. So we'll use it as an example for some of these next things. But so first of all, if I am playing solo, that's one of the first things I can do. Which is just 1625 in B flat still. If you want to try to create some kind of bass motion, and that's one of the reasons that these very small shapes that I'm showing you are useful, it's very easy to do so, like so, is by connecting this note to this note B flat to this note G, via some kind of scale-wise motion or chromatic approach. faster. One way to make it through a 1-6-2-5. So with a walking bass, that is. So we talked a little bit about how you would handle this in a solo context. Now in a band, what I'm going to do more often is let these two bass strings I mentioned at the beginning lay untouched and just play something like this. I'll just do the whole rhythm changes now. The whole A section of the rhythm changes, that is. And that's how that would feel. It works really well, again, to getting you to think more pianistically, where you're picking two, maybe even eventually 3 or 4 notes that represent the chord symbol versus just picking a shape. Now these of course have a shape, so the shape thing is unavoidable on the guitar, but these are the shapes that you want to memorize first, in my opinion. So if we put away the bass notes and look at the other side of the guitar, or the other sort of sector as we vertically divided the string sets here, a really cool thing that we can do to make these really start to pop off is to put one note on the B string or the second string in addition to the thirds and sevenths. There's a great example of Wes Montgomery doing this in his chord solo of Impressions, but honestly this is the kind of thing that you see just across the board with jazz guitar players. So I'm going to give you a little bit of this, and I'll give you with the bass notes and then without the bass notes. So here's with this is just an A section of rhythm changes with the bass notes, and I'll start up here. So this is they're gonna have an added note. So basically, before I get ahead of myself, I'll just say an added note would be something like this. If I play B flat major 7, you can put the 5th, the sharp 11th, the sharp 5, dissonant, or the 6th. Kind of all sit right there naturally, and especially if you don't play the bass note. They all sit really naturally, and you start to get chords that are just really well laid out when you use this method. So if I do rhythm changes here, or the A section to rhythm changes, with the +1, as I call these, which is one note added on top of each shell voicing, no bass. So what you start to get is a lot of color. I'm going to do those with the bass note too, just for a point of reference now, and I'll do a little walk in there as well, and you'll start to see, oh, you're really getting a lot of sound now. Last but not least, for those of you out there that are like, oh, this was easy, I got this. Well, let me show you one more thing, and that's adding 2 notes on top of the shell. And that's something that I alluded to Wes doing in his famous chord solo on Impressions, Wes Montgomery. But in our example here on rhythm changes, let's do it here. And I'm going to use one other chord that I haven't showed you yet, which is a major 6th, which is just root, 3rd, and 6th instead of root, 3rd, and 7th. So here goes a little bit with +2 voicings, and I'll actually leave the bass off. So you can get some pretty authentic jazz sounds out of these voicings, especially once you deal with 2 different sides of it. One is bass movement if you're playing by yourself, and the other is a +1 or a +2 adding 2 other chord tones, anything from a root all the way up to something like a 13 or an altered 5th on top. And again, if the rhythm changes stuff is a little tricky, go back to just 1-6-2-5 and try to play nice sounding voices in C. and then take it to the key of F and see if you can do the same thing. And our key of B flat was the next one. All right, I just wanted to talk to you real briefly about the right hand. Most of the stuff we've addressed today has dealt more with the left hand and the shapes, as chords tend to, but the right hand is super important. Basically the two different ways that I would use the right hand here is either picking, which is something that I mentioned Freddie Green did with a pick. Also, gypsy jazz guitar players do with the plectrum as well. So that would be like, or something like. Versus with my fingers, I usually do that when I want separation to be able to use the bass, or if I'm playing larger chords where I want to be able to articulate separate notes. So that might be either this, where I want to play bass, or in the case of just to be able to get a little bit of softer attack, and also articulation variability, blend differences between the strings. But essentially, you've got those two options, and the only thing to look out for is if you use the plectrum on these shell voicings, make sure you get that clean mute on the 5th string.
Thanks for watching. Check out DetroitJazzFest.org to learn more about their jazz programs and opportunities.